Come on. There we go. I hate StreamYard sometimes. Welcome to Pistons Talk Podcast. You guys, hope you guys are having a great weekend. Sucks that the Lions lost, but try to lift your spirits with some, Detroit Pistons talk, if you will. I'm joined again by Zar. I feel like you're a once-a-month guest, but I texted you. I was like, I got to have your brother on. I feel like me and him are always like exchanging like just basketball takes, but we have Zay on as well. So both of you guys, welcome to the show, man.
Appreciate you having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, for sure, man. Like, I know me and Zay were getting into the Zach LaVine stuff, which we'll probably get into later to the end of the podcast. But I wanted to get you guys' overall thoughts on the games this week, Pistons and the week 1 and 2. We could start with the Knicks game. Whoever wants to go first, like what were just like kind of your impressions of Cade Cunningham owning the Knicks in the Garden again?
I guess I'll lead. I think the Knicks game was like the ideal start to this week, especially following like the trend in media hype that the Pistons have been getting lately. I feel like it was like the ultimate culmination of, the ESPN's Bleacher Reports all starting to pick up on the Pistons is winning against, if we want to talk about markets, a big market team in MSG. I thought it was really similar to their win they had previously at MSG in terms of just kind of having momentum all the way through, where it felt like the Pistons really controlled the game. Even in wins, a lot of times it feels like they have to fight their way back in. But for the most part, they handled the Knicks pretty well, and they seem pretty uncomfortable with how the Pistons are playing, which is how you want to see it. And I know like immediately like the day after was like one of their off days, and like it led to like a Cade ESPN interview, and then the next day was a Cade Funny Marco interview, so it was just a good source of momentum. But then the Indiana game, it felt like they were brought down back to earth a little bit, just in terms of on the court wise. There's a lot to discuss in terms of like the other stuff, but it just felt like a game that they were kind of due for with the Indiana game. It's similar to like the Denver game on that West Coast trip. Like, that eventually they got to drop one. So that one kind of didn't surprise me. But the Phoenix one, I was a little surprised by in terms of their play, just because I feel like that seemed like a get back game, especially after the way the Indiana game unfolded with all the talking and, like extracurriculars. I really felt like, that Phoenix game would be like a good, like, this team talked a lot of shit on our, home court. We're going to go out and, remind people who we are type of game. And it just felt like a game where they really couldn't get going, especially offensively. Cade had a really rough stretch. I know that there was something along the lines of his thumb bothering him during that game, if broadcast picked that up, where it seemed like he was having some thumb issues, which kind of explained the poor shooting. But I think also there seems to be a power struggle right now, especially after that Knicks game, in terms of who like the second option on this team is. And I think Tobias has a really great first quarter, but 4 points outside of that, which, 17 points out of Tobias Harris is about what you'd expect. And that's what you gave him that contract for. But you'd like to see it more paced throughout the game. And I felt like Tim Hardaway has been a bigger source of offensive momentum for them than Beasley has lately. But at the same time, you don't want Tim Hardaway really putting the ball on the court as often as he has been. He does get a lot more foul calls than Cade, which is its own discussion again. But I feel like there needs to be a more solid roles. There needs to be more solid roles in terms of what the offense flows with, because everybody knows Cade's, the number one guy, but with no Ivy right now, it seems like, it's any guy's night. But it seemed like and when there is like that feeling of anybody could have their night and, any guy's looking to score, it kind of stops the ball movement that's been kind of trademark for this team and their success so far. So I'd like to see them get back to their usual ball movement and having more control over, scoring. And because I think there was a stat I saw, it was Cade had 11 assists that Phoenix game. And outside of that, no one on the roster had more than 2 assists. So that's just something that you really need to see improve in order for them to play their brand of basketball.
Yeah, I'd say it's I mean, we were definitely overperforming during that stretch where they were, I think it was 10-2 over the last 12 or 9-2, I'm not sure. And the Indiana game, that felt like a game like they were due to drop because you just can't stay that hot forever.
Yeah.
But I think they easily could have won that game. I think Cade going 14 for 47 over the last 2 is a little bit concerning because you start to wonder how long is that going to stay up, because part of it is him having so much on his shoulders with no Ivy. He's like responsible for all the scoring. So if it's catching up to him and his body's taking a toll, then it's like, well, who else is going to step up, and can we survive like a couple Cade stinkers?
Yeah, I mean, the Knicks game was weird because like the first quarter, I thought it was going to be a 20-point blowout, and then the second quarter happens and they still had a lead somehow. It's just like, I don't even know how that happens, but Cade was balling. The Pacers game was really chippy, but I never felt like they were going to win the game. Their energy levels were just way too low. And Zara, I know you were down there. I know it's completely off topic, but on the broadcast, I don't know if it was FanDuel's cameras, it looked like JB was like bitching at Rick Carlisle.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting part about that Indiana game. And it's interesting also covering it. You see a lot more than I feel like broadcast cameras really pick up on. And it really felt like from start to finish, these were 2 teams that just genuinely did not like each other. It kind of felt like a college game in that sense, where there's in the NBA, like at the end of the day, most guys kind of at least have some form of like acquaintanceship. Like they know of each other, they've worked out with each other, that type of thing. So there's oftentimes like when there's like heated moments or things like that, it's not really like a true I don't like you type of thing. It's more competitive. But that game really felt a lot more intense in terms of just a 1 through 15, like we don't like this team as a whole, rather than just like 2 guys kind of having a beef. So it felt like a college rivalry in that sense, where Carlisle and JB were exchanging words, but it wasn't just them, because Pistons coach Jarrett Jack, I saw was exchanging words with some assistant coaches on the Indiana side. Like there was a lot of talking from the assistant coaches as well, not only just JB and Rick, but Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, even Cade, we're all really getting into it. And I saw Tim Hardaway as well, really like jawing at people, which is, he's not someone you really see a lot of talking from. So it was surprising. Like when I think there was that incident where Siakam was over by the Pistons bench and Stewart ripped the ball from him. Tim Hardaway and Ron Holland joined the Pistons bench, but like got right in Siakam's face in terms of like, get out of here type of thing. So it was really intense, and it was a level of animosity that like was really palpable, because here's some like inside baseball. When I was returning to like, the press conference to go to the post-game presser, the Indiana coaches were like around the area, and you could tell like they were trying to calm down from the game, because it was so heated, and even the post buzzer stuff was so heated that even they were amped, because a lot of times like coaches end up just being the middle guy where okay, let's break it up type of thing. But when the coaches are really like amped, that's how it's just a overall team thing rather than an individual thing. So it was really interesting, and the fact that Duren, and again, I don't know how this picked up on TV, but Duren, when he was asked about the chippiness after JB had went up, looked over at PR and he thought about what he was going to say, and I think he decided against the possible fine he was going to get. And just said, we'll see him in a couple of weeks type of thing. So that, I mean, there's just a level of palpable animosity that these teams have, and I'm sure it stems from the first game of the season and the cup game, where it kind of flip-flopped, and I'm sure the game in Indiana is going to be one to watch in terms of just competitive basketball. Then also, I'm sure there'll be some talking as well. So, I mean, it's not going to turn. I don't think it's ever going to turn into a Malice at the Palace type of situation again. But it's good to have rivalries in the NBA at the end of the day, and it's good that teams just generally just don't like each other. It makes the product for fans a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean the Lego comment. I mean, I'm still laughing at that. Like the fact that he walked away and just like kind of put his head down, like kind of tells you, like even though like he lit the Pistons up like Miles Turner.
Yeah,
that was hilarious.
Yeah.
That whole game, like if we have them in a playoff series, man, like I don't know, maybe you do have a Malice in the Palace because like I think they were kind of like a little ticked off of like how the Pistons wrapped the score in Indiana for the Cup game. So I think they circled the Pistons on the calendar for a while because I don't really think they appreciated the Pistons like still trying to get buckets when there was like 30 seconds left because they were trying to get that point differential for that Cup game. Maybe they kind of like took it as like a disrespect, and that's why it kind of got a little chippy. I mean, Halliburton pisses me off because he talks so much shit and he doesn't impact anything at the end of the day. Like it was just Siakam and Turner lighting up the Pistons, and even Andrew Nebhart guarding Cade. But like that game was way too chippy for a regular season game, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was really chippy. I thought it was like exceptionally chippy, and I thought it was like it's again like that really interesting thing where like normally it's a 1 through 15 type of like, okay, like this guy has one beef with the other guy, but it was a whole team and their coaching staff not liking the other team and their coaching staff. So it's just something you don't see very often, but it did kind of remind me, thinking of Indiana, of how, the Bucks last year, where there was the whole game ball situation and that turned into a whole thing, which also stemmed from the NBA Cup. So I just kind of think this might be a thing for the Pacers. And if this gets them motivated, I mean, they've been on a great stretch lately, so that's great for them. But at the end of the day, like, talking only gets you so far, right? And it's going to be interesting. I'm really curious to see how that game on the 29th goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that should be an ESPN game. I'm just saying it now, like pick that up for national TV because I mean those guys were talking shit like as soon as like jump ball, and I was like, okay, this game's getting a little bit chippy, just for a regular season game.
Yeah.
Suns game, I didn't really feel like the Pistons lost. I felt like they just kind of shot themselves in the foot with the defensive rebounding. Like I don't get how a team like them is so piss poor of like just rebounding the basketball at the end of the day. It seems like if Duran's not grabbing the rebound, you got like 4 other Pistons just looking up at the ball and saying who's going to get it most nights. And then like the free throw shooting, man, this year it's been really, really bad. Like
that's the biggest anomaly to me.
Yeah,
is the free throw shooting, because I mean, obviously one man can't do everything, but with a shooting coach like Fred Vinson, you would think like that's something that really gets enforced a lot, is like before you leave the gym, you have to hit X amount of free throws. Because even Cade has struggled with free throw shooting this year in terms when he gets to the line, which is again, its own discussion, but it is surprising how much they've struggled at the free throw line this year.
I feel like they struggle a little too much in the fourth quarter too. I mean, even Cade, there was that game where he had the intentional miss, but before that he had missed one at the line that I don't think he was trying to miss. There was that Rockets game where Tobias couldn't hit, and all we needed was both free throws. Ron Holland versus the Bucks, he could have hit those. I mean, last night Tim Hardaway couldn't hit free throws. That's basic stuff.
I mean, if I was their coach, they'd be shooting like 500 free throws a day. Like you can't be that bad. I mean, I think they went like 24 out of 36. I mean, like if you just hit like a good like 78% of those, you probably win that basketball game. It's not like Phoenix is like a good defensive team by any means. Like they're actually like a piss poor defensive team, which is why I thought they could have like won that game. But that game was really weird from start to finish. Like the energy level isn't like where you would want it to be, from the first to the fourth quarter. But I mean, I guess I'll take 1 and 2 versus 0 and 3. But they have a really rough stretch of games coming up. I mean, they got the Rockets tomorrow. That's probably going to be very heated with the Thompson twins and Cade and Jalen. Hope Cade gets his poster back on Jalen Green. I really do. I need that tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't personally. I need the Jalen Green discourse to just die forever. I'm genuinely, I'm thinking about cutting the hair just so it stops because I'm so tired of it.
I mean, if you cut the hair, they'll just start calling you Jared McCain like they did last time.
Oh man. Yeah, but in terms of just rivalries as well, like the Jalen Cade thing is, at the end of the day, I'm sure it means a little more to Jalen than it does to Cade. But at the end of the day, it's still very like a competitive rivalry. Like I don't think these are two guys that are really just like hate each other type of thing, you know. And then the Thompson twins again, like, you know, they're brothers. Like it's not really like a thing where like I'm sure they'll be competitive against each other, but it doesn't feel like real palpable, like, oh, like they hate each other type of thing. So in terms of rivalries, like I feel like the Rockets one is more like a fan base type of thing. Like it's like they bicker all the time. Like since July of 2021, they have not stopped bickering. But it feels like to me, if the Pistons had like two solid rivals so far in the NBA, and just in terms of like the on the court aspect, it seems like Charlotte and Indiana would be the two.
And I hate that Charlotte even is in the conversation, but they have our number. I don't know what kind of like witchcraft voodoo they do in North Carolina, but these games, I swear every game goes down to the wire. I have chest pains. I age 15 years every time I watch a Hornets game. I have to hear Eric Collins like lose his shit every time LaMelo crosses someone up. I was just like, I can't do this, man. I don't want to see the Hornets 4 times a year.
I gotta say though, I saw Eric Collins in the media room after the last Hornets game, and I was like, that was generally one of the few times, and because like I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and that was one of the few times I was like, wow, that's Eric Collins right there. Like I was genuinely like, I was a lot of times like, you know, I'm not really afraid to introduce myself or anything like that, but I was like, damn, I know him. Like I've watched him on TV. That's the Miles Bridges.
Oh, Billy B. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think he's one of the best PA announcers in the NBA. Like he gets so hyped.
Yeah, some people think it's too much. I think it's entertaining.
And I mean, even when Johnny Kane's on, like he loses his voice every time like Cade like does anything. Like I love the energy. I just love that. Like I don't care if you sound like a jackass. Like it's entertaining at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So with it being trading deadline season, there's just so much trade rumors going around. So we have 2 separate quotes that I did make graphics for this week. Now the Brian Windhorst stuff, I mean, it was a whole lot of nothing, but I mean, you can kind of read the tea leaves. For you guys that are watching live on YouTube, this is a quote from Brian Windhorst on his podcast, The Hoop Collective. It says, I do think that the Pistons will still facilitate trades. I think their thinking has evolved is they're going to be careful taking on players for multiple years that may not be valuable players to their roster. So that was kind of Brian Windhorst's take. And then we also had Jake Fisher. Obviously, he's doing stuff with the Steinline over there, talking about the Detroit Pistons have left rival teams with the impression that they aren't weighing on any truly massive moves, such as a swing for New Orleans Brandon Ingram, who would need some of Cade's touches. So I kind of wanted to get your guys' just overall thoughts on both Brian Windhorst and Jake Fisher's reporting with the Detroit Pistons and what they may or may not do at the deadline. Zay, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I think we definitely do have to be careful and not making the same mistakes that Troy Weaver had made, where you're getting guys who might not play even 45 games in a season. Like Bojan hasn't suited up this year. Joe Harris is out of the league. You don't want to take on those kind of contracts, especially when, the most assets you're getting are like second round picks. We do need assets because we don't have a lot. We're a little depleted asset wise. But I think we should be careful in making sure that the players we trade for can contribute. And I think Trajan's done a great job with that, getting guys like Tim Hardaway like that. I mean, we got assets for him too. Granted, we sent out Grimes, but that's its own thing. And as it comes to like Brandon Ingram wouldn't be my top choice. I don't think he meshes well with Cade. But I do think we should be more open to trying to get Cade a little bit more of a co-star. I think he's having way too good of a season for us to not really try to at least make a little bit of a push for that 5-6 seed. I don't think we should just tread water in a sense.
Yeah, I kind of echo those sentiments, but I mean, obviously I'm no Windhorst or even Jake Fisher, but I do hear things here and there. And from my understanding, since the beginning of the season, since Trajan's really got here, I haven't expected the Pistons to go out and make that Zach LaVine trade, for example, or go out and make the Brandon Ingram trade. With that being said, I do think they need to operate under the impression that they are a serious team in the Eastern Conference. And I think that's ultimately the shift in thinking is, we're going to start doing things in order to best maximize our winning versus best maximize, the asset pool.
Mhm.
I don't think that means the Pistons won't make a trade that gets them back a second round pick or a first round pick or whatever it may be. But I do think that Detroit will be a little less open to taking on, for example, like a Ben Simmons, something like that. Like I just feel as if here's what I'd go for. If I were the Detroit Pistons, and based on everything that everybody's heard, and my own knowledge, as little as it may be compared to them, I would expect them to go along the lines of getting like a serviceable role player to add on to their veterans rather
Mhm.
than, cashing in the veterans for like a big scoring upside star. And I think that makes sense right now. I think you want to see how far the team you constructed goes if you're Trajan Langdon, because at the end of the day, this is pretty much his team. Like he didn't draft Cade, Sasser, Thompson, but the rest of the roster is his decisions, and he wants to see how far this team can go, and especially when making decisions on guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway. I'm sure that seeing how they do in important game scenarios and how they play off of Cade, especially Cade, is really important. And I think they are hopeful that Jaden Ivey comes back close to when the playoffs would start, but they can't bet on it. And I think for that reason, whoever they go out and get, I would like to have the option to not only be a secondary ball handler, but to score the basketball. I think Colin Sexton's a great pull if they want to go that route, because I don't think he would cost much in terms of assets, and he fits pretty well into their cap space as well. So I feel like even if it's a thing of like let's say he plays really well, right? Like he's played under JB before. He's kind of a dog on both ends, so he really fits the identity that this team is going for anyways. And if Ivy comes back, it's not a thing of Sexton or Ivy. It's just, okay, we can move Sexton back to the bench because he's come off the bench for
Mhm.
Utah. So I don't think it's something that he really holds a lot of reservation for, especially like if it's in a serious like playoff game scenario. Having two dynamic scorers like that, and Ivy and Sexton, I don't really see an issue with it. It might be a bit repetitive, and if ultimately you have to make a decision between the two, I'm sure you go with Jaden Ivey. But it's a good thing to have. It's a good problem to have, in my opinion. And then the James Edwards, that you had tweeted it, the trade for Bruce Brown and Cameron Payne. I know you're not the biggest proponent of it, but that's a smaller move than a Colin Sexton trade would be. But I still think even that would be really helpful for the Pistons and the things that they kind of lack right now. Defense is, and this is Langdon's thinking, like he said this on his first day here, is that, defense is about effort. And that's true. But at the same time, you still need defensively talented players, because Isaiah Stewart, Asar Thompson, Ron Holland are obviously all very defensively talented, but you need a little more help, especially like in the wing department. And when it comes to guarding guards, like a Bruce Brown can guard 1 through 4, sometimes even 1 through 5. Like Steve Nash had him doing pretty much anything in Brooklyn. So I feel like he's someone that really could be a Swiss Army knife for this team, fits the identity of the team. And I personally would love to see Isaiah Stewart, Bruce Brown minutes together, just because those are two of my favorite Pistons in recent memory. And I just feel like the identity, like, and that's a really big thing. Like, it got beat over the head for Lions fans of like, we can't just bring in anybody. Like everybody has to fit the identity of who comes here. But I'm thinking that's kind of the thinking for Detroit as well, is it can't just be anybody. Like you have to fit what we're building. We have to fit what, they're building in the locker room, and, ultimately not be a very big ego guy. Cause it doesn't strike me that like this is a team with a lot of ego.
Yeah, I mean, like the Bruce Brown and Isaiah Stewart stuff, man, like I would not want to be on the other end of those fights. Because I know Bruce is about that life. I know you probably know that, like, covering the team a little bit. I've heard some stories off the court of like how wild Bruce Brown is, but I'm not going to share them on this podcast because they're not PG friendly. But I think your head is in the right place. We talked last week, like a player I mentioned was an Atlanta Hawk, and his asking price is probably way too high. But I mentioned DeAndre Hunter, which I kind of feel like he's pretty slept on. He's kind of underrated in the sense, doesn't really get brought up, too often by like national media. But I mean, like kind of like a 3-4 that could maybe possibly be a Tobias replacement once his contract is over. But like, a B- player. Not saying that you have to go out and get the Levines or the Ingrams, but just like someone that can contribute, someone that could take some, stress off Cade, where Cade doesn't have to initiate everything. Maybe you go out, see what Washington wants for a Brogdon, or, something like that. Maybe some backup point guard help. I love Sasser. I think he's done better as of late, but there's still instances where I'm watching him and I'm like, yeah, like he needs to play off ball way more than he's playing on ball.
Yeah, I think he gets a little bit too harsh of a criticism from this fan base, because even when he was in college, he had Jamal Shed next to him. So they kind of split those ball handling duties, and Sasser could go shot hunt more while Shed did a little more playmaking. And you see Shed, he's actually doing really solid for the Raptors. I think if we let Sasser play into his own role a little bit more and just go get shots, I think he'd be way better than what he is when he's trying to be like a Ish Smith type of guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd kill for Ish Smith on this roster right now. I mean, he would light it up. It's like a backup reserve. But no, I don't want to shit on Sasser too much, because I think, the past couple of games, even like the last week, like you saw him like take over, scoring more, getting to the cup, defending his ass off, even though Grayson Allen tried to take his head off yesterday with that elbow. But I mean, overall, I'm not really expecting like fireworks at this deadline. I do think they make a move. Could they get draft capital out of it? Sure. Could they take on maybe a contract that's a little bit pricey, like a THJ? Maybe. But I don't really see, Trajan like just kind of pulling like what a Van Gundy did for Blake. I just don't see that right now. Even though Cade's playing at like an all-NBA level, in my opinion, I think you could have conversations of him being a top 15 player in the NBA right now, just the way he's playing. But I think help is coming. I see a lot of fans just not even watching this podcast, but just through scrolling social media, like, well, why are we not doing anything to get Cade Cunningham help? Well, trade deadlines February 6th. I think each and every day, these GMs, front office executives are going to talk with each other, and, more trade rumors will come out of, possible trades. But I think Langdon will do right by Cade, right by the Pistons, and it's probably going to be a move that's very calculative and probably a player we're not even talking about right now.
Yeah, that's the thing with Trajan is I feel like the moves that he makes, I mean, outside of the Tim Hardaway one, they're usually ones you don't see coming. And I think he's someone that likes to not get a lot of things out, is my understanding, because even the Ron Holland pick, like, nobody really saw that coming. So I think he's definitely working, and I'm sure like there will be, a trade that happens, because at the end of the day, there's $14 million in cap space that you have to add talent onto your team right now. You have to do it. But I do think, and this is what Windhorse said, is I feel like flexibility is a really big thing when it comes to whatever contract they take on, whether it be, for assets or, just for the sake of helping this team. I think it's going to be something to pay attention to, is like when we're guessing, or you're hearing things, like looking at the length of contracts, and when they might be up, because from my understanding, like if they get someone with more than 1 year on his deal, it's probably going to be just an additional year, like similar to how Tobias's contract is structured, because I think they're looking at maximizing their flexibility summer 2026.
Yeah, I mean, because you got Cade's extension coming up. You don't want to like have two guys at $40 million and then you don't have a bench.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, some people have mentioned Michael Porter Jr. I like MPJ, but the contract's atrocious. And I think he would do really well in Detroit. I'll just say that. I think it's like a number 2 option next to Cade. I think those two would just be deadly together.
A guy I think that, I mean, I've heard like a little bit about him, but I don't think enough people are looking at him as like maybe a potential like backup is Malcolm Brogdon. He's in Washington. He's not really playing much. His contract is a little high for me. It's at like 22, and I think he's got another year left after this year. But if he can be healthy and give you games, he's a very good player to have. Like, that's a good veteran presence, and he can run the floor. You can bump Sasser down to the 2 and help him go get some shots. I would be a little more interested in cashing in for a little bit bigger than Brogdon, but that's just how I view it. I know it's probably not the most logical thing for the Pistons to do right now, though.
I mean, I've been mentioning him for 3 months because I know he's in Washington. And I know, Troy's just an advisor over there. I'm kind of hoping he kind of this, Troy Stretch and Weaver over there, and we could pick him up on a minimum. You never know.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's all these talks about, the team selling and these contracts that, teams are looking to trade, but there's always those trades that just never, actually happen. And I definitely think the Pistons could be, if they don't go out and, get talent at the trade deadline, which I'd be surprised if they don't get anybody. But if they don't, I definitely think they could maximize the cap space they have with the buyout market for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure Windhorst, I know we didn't touch on this, he said that the Pistons aren't even like considering using the disabled veteran money that they could get for Jaden Ivey, which I think is like around $7 or $8 million if they actually want to use it. He mentioned that they're not even considering it, which kind of tells you that they think that he can come back, which, I mean, if he does come back, it'd have to be like late April, early May. I mean, if you kind of like read into the type of injury that he had, and just the bone itself takes a good 2 months to heal, and then the rehab with that. So I'm hopeful that, Jaden Ivey could come back because he was playing some of the best ball of his career. But I like where your head's at, Zay, with Brogdon. That's someone that I've been keeping my eye on for quite some time. I played in Boston, played in Milwaukee, good vet. I feel like him and Cade have a very similar game, and he could be like a really good veteran for him to lean on. And actually, when he goes to the bench, he doesn't have to have an anxiety attack, because if there is a lead, when Cade goes to the bench, that lead's gone. Like there's no chance we're keeping that 12, 13-point lead when Cade goes to the bench, because we just can't score, and the offense is very unorganized when, he does go to the bench. But I'm hoping they get some kind of facilitator, whether that's a guard, whether that's a wing, somebody at the end of the day.
Yeah, I feel like that's also the priority for this front office. Like, regardless of, how aggressive they end up being, I think going out and getting someone to take the ball handling pressure off of Cade is ultimately the goal.
I know some people said we need a rim protector, which, I mean, here's the thing with the centers on this team. We have 3 backup centers, and at the end of the day, one of them is starting. And I think Jalen Duren during the win streak played better, but this week, still not to my liking defensively. I don't want to harp on him too hard, because I feel like I've been really hard on him throughout this season. But maybe they look to get a veteran center. I don't know. Like my dream is Steven Adams. Like, get him into Detroit, get him away from Houston. I feel like that'd be a good bet to bring here.
I think another thing that is kind of overlooked as a need. And a lot of people will harp on Cade for, they say he disappears in the fourth quarter. But the thing is, when you're out there in the fourth quarter, we're running a lineup of, Cade, Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, Tobias, Duren. Teams aren't going to really look at any of those guys when, like last possession. Who else are you looking at? You're looking at Cade. I think if we could get someone who can close games, I think that'd be huge, because I think that's what's been missing from this team for a long time. And I was hoping Cade would be able to, but it's just too hard with the way the roster is constructed. I mean, even with Ivy, I still think we could have used a closer, and I think we should go try and get a closer. But the price of those closers is, you're talking guys like Levine, and then you start thinking, maybe the contract's too high. What do you do with Ivy next year if you go get Levine? Those kind of things.
I mean, you could go a tier below and see what Portland wants for Anthony Simons. Like, just start the conversation because they're rebuilding. I know Anthony Simons is on a little bit of a hefty deal, and it kind of goes against what Brian Windhorst reported. Same with Jake Fisher. But I mean, like, I would just get those conversations going because, I mean, Pistons has played Portland, and I thought he was going to win on that game. He couldn't miss. He was getting to his shots. He scored at all three levels. I think a guy like that next to Cade, he could be a guy that could close games. Cade doesn't have to do every little thing. And you see how teams are game planning for him now. They're tripling him, doubling him, full court pressure. I think the scouting report is just getting his grill because he does not like those scrappy guards like Nebhard or even like Jackson in Milwaukee. I thought has done like a really good job of just like defending him throughout the season. But I mean, getting someone else to kind of take the pressure off and maybe you play Cade off ball in certain situations so he doesn't always have to facilitate and set everything up and defend the best player.
Yeah, Simons he's always been one of my like targets, like dream targets, because he can fill it up. There's not many guys who can shoot like Simons can. Like there's maybe like Jordan Poole, Levine sometimes. I mean, this year he has Cam Thomas maybe, but in terms of realistic targets, I'd put Levine 1, Simons 2 if I'm Trajan, because those guys can fill it up and they can handle the ball. Like Cade, he's really been struggling when teams blitz him, and when they send two and they're physical too, like Ryan Dunn, he didn't even need someone else to go with him last night because he was just so physical that it bothered Cade. And I think them not being able to hone in on Cade like that would really help the team and help Cade himself too.
Yeah, and you don't want to exhaust Cade to the point where, like, he's just playing through injuries. Like Zar mentioned, they were working on his thumb last night. He's got a full knee sleeve on. Like we're halfway through the season, and like I'm sure, like if the organization said like, hey, take a game off, he probably wouldn't. But I think it's needed because he just looks exhausted. And I think the shooting
on that bench, he's got those 2 ice knee sleeves on. He looks exhausted. His eyes are red.
Yeah, I mean, he needs a week off, honestly. I want to get into Bleacher Report. Now, obviously, both of these trades suck. But I think the fans will like it because these are 2 players that I think a lot of fans like. And the first one is Miles Bridges. And I apologize, sir, because every time you're on here, somehow Isaiah Stewart is in a trade scenario, but this is the trade. Isaiah Stewart, Tim Hardaway, and the only draft pick that we'll probably have this year, Toronto's second, for Miles Bridges. So when you look at this trade overall, what do you think of it? And do you think a player like Miles Bridges may or may not be on Trajan in the Pistons radar?
I mean, this is no disrespect to whoever wrote the article, but at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of these trades are really just made with like a 2K machine. You know what I mean? Like it's like 2K trade finder and like, okay, like, all right, like we need to get something out today. Like let's get some trades going. Who could Detroit use, and it turns into one of those types of things. Just because like, if you look at how this, and I'm going to take away completely like who's or what is in the trade for Detroit. If you look at Miles Bridges and you just simply place him onto this Pistons roster, what does he add that you don't really have? Because Miles Bridges, sure, in 2022 was a good target for the Detroit Pistons, but 2025 Miles Bridges is not nearly the same player he used to be. And it's unfortunate that, he's seemingly kind of fallen off a bit, but at the same time, there is no world where Miles Bridges on the court, at least, is a good fit for the Detroit Pistons, not to mention, in terms of the off the court things. And I'm not even going to get into everything there, but just in terms of kind of how he is, I can't see him necessarily being the best fit with the locker room. So I don't see the clamoring for Miles Bridges, if there is any. He's not had a good year in Charlotte, and I feel like he doesn't really provide much in terms of spacing. His shot diet not encouraging, and his athleticism is nowhere near where it used to be. So it just seems to me like that'd be a really puzzling target for the Pistons to have in general. And then when you include like who they're trading is one, Tim Hardaway, who's an important part of their rotation, provides spacing and veteran leadership. Then you have Isaiah Stewart, who is one of the best rim protectors in the NBA. And this is a team that desperately needs rim protection. And also in terms of culture, identity, like I've said it a million times. I think Troy Weaver said a lot of things, but it's really true. There's not a single person who embodies Detroit Pistons basketball more than Isaiah Stewart. I feel like he's one of those guys that like you just think about what a Detroit Piston like. You could take a Rick Mahorn and have him watch the Detroit Pistons, and obviously Rick watches the games. He does commentary. If he hadn't watched a Pistons game since he played, his favorite player on this team would be Isaiah Stewart. You know what I mean? Like he's just a guy that really fits the identity and soul of the team. And he provides so much in terms of defense. I think his offensive skill set's kind of been underutilized this year a little bit in the role that he's had. And, you know, he's still maximized the role that he's had, but you know, he's a stretch five and he rarely takes 3-pointers or has the opportunity to take 3-pointers, but he does everything this team has ever asked of him and more. So trading away a guy like that for Miles Bridges, who not only off the court, but also on the court is a questionable fit, would really be head scratching. Like, you know, like would a Miles Bridges slow the development of a Ron Holland or an Asar Thompson, you know? Cause like when you think about, especially Asar, like how you want to play Asar is, to me, I've always seen Asar offensively similar to a Bridges or similar to an Aaron Gordon in terms of like how you best optimize his skill set. And then you include their only second-round pick that they have this year, and most likely their only draft selection they'll have, which luckily for them will be, you know, pretty early on, basically like a late first. I really don't see the value of this trade at all.
Yeah, I mean, go for it, Zay.
I don't think I'd trade either of these players straight up for Miles Bridges this year. His efficiency has just taken an insane downhill turn. He doesn't jump like he used to. Like that was part of the enticing part of Miles Bridges, was like you could use him as like this little bit of a lob threat, you know, put him in the dunker spot. This year, I don't know how much of those dunks he would come down with. Not to mention, you know, if you trade Tim Hardaway for Miles Bridges straight up, you're losing shooting. Tim Hardaway has been almost at about a 40% clip on a lot of attempts a game this year. And I think he also does a lot of little things. Like this year, I think I saw a stat. I'm not sure if it was you or someone else, but Tim Hardaway has taken more charges this year than the entire Pistons team did all of last season. Like things like that, like you just can't. Miles Bridges isn't going to put his body on the line for this team. And then, I mean, same point goes for Isaiah Stewart, not to mention him being one of the most switchable bigs and having one of the best interior defensive presences, despite him being undersized. I do think Paul Reed having a bigger role would be beneficial to the team, but I don't think I would want it to come like that.
Yeah, I mean, nothing against Miles Bridges. I think a lot of people like him as a player because of the Michigan State ties, and they want to see, like, you know, homegrown talent play for the Pistons. I get it. But losing Isaiah Stewart, I think, would probably be a loss for the Detroit Pistons. And I don't think a trade like this would happen, because the biggest reason why they traded Nick Richards is to let Mark Williams get more of those first center touches. And he's been an absolute heater, just having looks like freaking Andre Drummond type stats, having like 20 games and a couple of blocks. Like he's just been going crazy. I don't like this trade because you're losing your best rim protector, your best defender, arguably, in Stu. You're losing a veteran in Tim Hardaway Jr., which you like him as a player, you like the floor spacing, but I think off the court stuff that fans don't get to see, he's a really positive, uplifting person from what I've heard from other people, other reporters like yourself, Zar. Like, I think Tim Hardaway has just bought in into what Trajan Langdon probably sold him when he traded for him. Just like the culture that they're trying to rebuild in Detroit and trying to get this team being like more of a winning product. I don't really know how a fit would work with Cade and Jaden with Miles Bridges. Maybe he's your third option, and you would still have the bias on this team. It would be really weird and clunky. Like someone would be an odd man out, and I think it might be Ron Holland, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't think Miles Bridges is worth slowing down the development of Ron Holland, especially when you look at how much he's progressed so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago, sure. I mean, like athletically, he was like jumping out at the gym, and like he was probably LaMelo's like favorite lob threat. But I mean, like I've watched a couple of Charlotte games outside of like when they played the Pistons, and like a bunch of like clunky, like mid-range, like settling just for like really bad contested jump shots, which I don't know if like Father Time is catching up to him. I don't know if he's not in shape, because it looks like he's gained a couple of pounds, but I mean he's definitely not the same player. We do have one more trade, and I feel like this trade is worse somehow in the Miles Bridges trade. And this one is for Kyle Kuzma, so we'll go over it real quick. So again, you'd be trading Tim Hardaway Jr., Simone Fontecchio, a 2025 second round pick via Toronto, and a 2027 second and a 2028 second via Miami for Kyle Kuzma. Zay, I'll let you go first with this one. Like, what do you think of a trade for Kyle Kuzma? Because I know the Wizards have been really strong about their asking price of what they want. I think at one point it was 3 firsts, then it was 2 seconds. Now it's a first. Maybe it's just a couple of seconds. So, like, what do you kind of think of Kyle Kuzma as a fit on this team?
Similar to how I feel about Brandon Ingram. He's an all right defender. He's not an amazing one, and his play style, like his pace of playing, is way too similar to Cade for me, for him to be a second option for this team. Like, he's a little more slow. He needs a little more time to get to the basket than I would like if we're trading for a second option in this year. Also, he's just developing bad habits in Washington, as are a lot of those guys. Like, it's just kind of a place where people are getting traded and then they just start trying things they haven't ever tried in their careers, and their shot diet gets worse. Similar to like Miles Bridges this year in Charlotte, like Kuzma's shot diet has just continuously just gotten worse over the years. And I also don't want to send out those second round picks for a guy like Kuzma, because long term, when we're talking about contention with this team, Kuzma probably wouldn't even be around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think both of these trades have a similar theme of guys from Michigan, specifically Flint, that get to come home, which as a storyline I'm sure is great, but in reality, like, they're both also similar in terms of they would have been great Pistons like 2 or 3 years ago. In 2025, I just don't think Kyle Kuzma is a great fit for the Pistons. And we talked about ball stoppage earlier. Like, I feel like that would be a major issue upon arrival for Kyle Kuzma's, ball stoppage, because he's not really known for being the guy that's going to make the extra pass. And I feel like Kyle Kuzma as well. Like, you're from Flint, right? Like, he does a lot of good things for Flint, but at the same time, it would feel so weird if the infamous "you just don't want to be that team" guy ended up suiting up for the Pistons exactly a year later. I mean, like, even ESPN used that tweet with the Cade interview just a couple days ago. So it'd be really, really weird. And I'm so certain that tweet is definitely like hung up somewhere in the Pistons Performance Center as like some form of motivation. So it'd be really weird if Kyle Kuzma walked through those doors and saw his own tweet hung up or something like that. Because that's something like the Pistons players oftentimes online are not going to come out and like start anything or say much. That doesn't mean they don't see it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just one of those things. And like, he became kind of the face of, making fun of the Pistons during the streak, and it'd just be a really weird thing to see him come through and play for them. But just in terms of the on the court aspect, again, like I feel like the pace of play is a thing. I think whoever you get, like, if they're going to be, ball dominant, you don't want them to slow the offense down even more, especially with no Ivy. And I also just feel like his shooting is nowhere near where it should be. And if you're looking to replace someone like Tim Hardaway, and even Fontecchio, like, he's been streaky, but like Kyle Kuzma, I could be wrong, but I want to say this is his worst shooting season, like in recent memory, where he's not making the shots that he used to, even like in LA, right? Like, I don't think this is the same Kyle Kuzma that, people have in their minds, like the Kyle Kuzma who gamed it against the Pistons a few years ago and was waving to the crowd. Like, it's just not the same guy anymore. I think there's a fit for him somewhere, but I do think there's a thing of habits as well. Like, I don't know if Washington's really been the best environment for him. Like, I think him and Jordan Poole are interesting to see, because people associate Jordan Poole with shot chucking and, like the bad habits and things like that. But this has been a great year for Jordan Poole in Washington. Mm-hmm. Kyle Kuzma's gone. The team was there was a lot of talk amongst like the NBA community of like, oh, the Washington Wizards are actually kind of fun to watch when it was Poole and the young guys. And then Kuzma came back and they just went on an insane losing skid. So I don't see the value in him, and let alone it being 2 rotation players and 3 second-round picks.
Yeah, you aren't kidding. Just for curiosity, I wanted to pull up his stats. So shooting a whopping 26% from 3 when he's been, league average around, 33 to 35%. And he went from 22 points a game his last 2 seasons to 14 points a game. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. I'm good, man.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. Like, I feel like a lot of people just haven't really been paying attention to how bad he has been in Washington this year. Like, there's just no world where Kyle Kuzma is worth Tim Hardaway, Fontecchio in 3 seconds. Like, if anything, you should be getting an asset in return. His opportunity to really leave Washington while leaving as a positive, asset was with Dallas last year, and he turned that down. So I can't see really a Kyle Kuzma trade that lands Washington any positive value.
Yeah, I didn't know he was doing that bad until I looked up his numbers. Those are gruesome, man. Like, wow, that's really bad.
I guess I could think. I just want to say something. I mean, a lot of guys wrote off Tim Hardaway. We're talking about him in trades, and we don't want to move him. But when we made that trade, a lot of people were mad about that deal because his production had taken a hit. But I think the difference between Tim Hardaway's production taking a hit and Kyle Kuzma's production taking a hit is that, or Miles Bridges even, is that Charlotte and Washington are, they're tanking. Their production should be going up, if anything, because they're playing for nothing. Versus a guy like Tim Hardaway, his game it got to the point where, they had guys who could, fill the role better. Tim started getting cold in the playoffs. He barely played in the finals. But like, that's a finals team. So when you bring a guy from a finals team to the Pistons, their production will go back up. But if you bring a guy from Charlotte or Washington, they're just going to practice the same habits.
Yeah, I mean, I think ever since he got traded from LA, like the way in which he plays, I think is very ISO, me ball, not team basketball, where it will translate to wins. Putting up 20 points a game is putting up 20 points a game, but like, you have to kind of look at what team they're on and like how much they're actually winning. And they're kind of like empty stats at the end of the day, but I had no idea he fell off a cliff like that. Zariq, thanks for pointing that out. Because I had no idea. I did not go down the Washington rabbit hole, especially with the Lions getting smacked by the Commanders yesterday. I didn't want to look up more Washington stuff.
That's fair. Yeah. I just weirdly, I found myself like on Wizards Twitter at some point earlier this season, and I just kind of like took a look, and I was looking at his stats, and I was like, Jesus, this is not like the same Kyle Kuzma, like even like from like the rookie year where they were getting Jason Tatum, comparisons. Like I just it's not the same guy, and maybe he has like some injury that's still bothering him or something, but regardless. Like, the ball stoppage, the bad shot selection, those are things you don't really have to chalk up to injury.
No, not at all. We can get into the next segment because I think a lot of Pistons fans are going to have very strong opinions about this. Now, when I was watching this clip on one of Underdog's new podcasts, it was Cade, so I clicked on it, and it started positive. I was like, cool. Rashad McCants, for what it's worth, most of the time I don't agree with him, but he was comparing Cade Cunningham to a 2025 version of Brandon Roy, which I don't agree with, but I was like, hey, at least he's talking positively about the Pistons and Cade Cunningham. But then Gilbert Arenas, he just could not help himself. It's something with the Detroit Pistons, and this is what he said about Cade Cunningham. I have the quote, and I'll just read it for you guys. He says, quote, "I just see like some of them young kids, man, they're so good. They're too good for their city. Some cities like Detroit, probably. I don't know if he's a superstar yet. I don't know. I don't know his mannerisms, like his personality, because he doesn't, get shown like that. But his game is big city, so it's going to be in one of those big cities," end quote. So, one, I don't agree with it. I think Cade Cunningham's game can flourish in Detroit. I think a lot of people, I don't know what it is about, media outside of Detroit. They think Detroit's a small market when it's not. We just had the NFL draft here. We broke a record. Had over, I don't even know how many people, close to 1 million people over, a 4-day period. But, I'm rambling a little bit. Zar, what do you think of these comments from Gilbert Arenas saying that Cade Cunningham's game is too good for a city like Detroit?
Yeah. First of all, Gilbert Arenas is, and it's rare that I often find myself, getting to the point where I just mute something on Twitter. There was a point, I think, last year where I just had to mute Gilbert Arenas just because he talks, and this is my issue also with NBA media in general, and this is why I kind of do what I do. I have an issue when people don't know what they're talking about, right? Like, I love, and this is no shot to them at all, because this is completely different, but I love Inside the NBA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inside the NBA, I love for entertainment value. It is a great TV show, but in terms of sports analysis and specifically basketball analysis, there's not much of value there. It's very just barbershop talk. It's super oh, did you see this happen? Oh, Chuck, that's crazy. It's not meant to be taken seriously. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people, I think of Nikias, who I really enjoy his content, but he gets really riled up about Inside the NBA. I don't think Inside the NBA really takes itself very seriously. And I think the mistake that happens amongst NBA fans is, they take what they say seriously, and they think that Shaq, Chuck, and Kenny are really seriously watching these games, when it's very clear that they're not. It's more just about the entertainment value. But when you guys have guys like Gilbert Arenas who get on the mic on their own platforms and say nothing of value and just continuously troll, to me, it brings down the value of the sport as a whole, and it gets muddied with just general discourse as well. It turns into this thing where an uninformed person is going to say something that has no merit to it whatsoever, but you throw it on Twitter and it just starts going.
Yeah.
And this whole big city discourse is one of those things. And I think Gilbert also just kind of has a gripe about the Pistons because he is a little bit scared of Isaiah Stewart, and that's another discussion. But I don't think there is such a thing as big city game anymore. And Eric Vincent, who's the clutch points reporter for the Pistons. He's been doing great work. I worked with him in the Cruise the last couple of years too. Asked JB about this, and I echo those sentiments that JB said, were basically that in this day and age there is no big city game anymore. Players reach where they reach regardless of market. And on top of that, Detroit, like you said, is not a small market. And it gets casted as one in the NBA, and I never really quite understood it because consistently when they were at their peak, no one was selling out arenas like the Pistons were. And this is just also a really large city that's super passionate about their sports. Like, it's obviously not this just population wise as big as a New York City or, even like a Dallas. But I still think the Pistons and the city of Detroit as a whole are so unique in their passion for sports in general that it rivals like, the UK where you talk about soccer. Like, I was talking about this with someone earlier. I feel like Detroit really is so unique in their passion for sports that, like, it's like a culture. It's part of the culture here. And when the Lions lost yesterday, like, you could feel it, right? Like, there's just a community effect. Like, when you were around anywhere Metro Detroit yesterday, Lions gear everywhere. I drove past a cop car that had Lions flags on it. Like, it's a serious thing here. And I feel like at some point, and I think the shift has started to happen, but not everybody catches up at the same time. And Gilbert Arenas has not been known in the recent years for really being super informed. So it doesn't surprise me. But, like, I've always really loved the UK and how they are about, soccer or football, and how it's something that just runs communities. Like, it's something that everyone rallies behind. And I think Detroit's so similar in that way that if the Pistons make the playoffs this year, I know we talked about the Jared Goff chance, and that's its own thing, but I think you'll see a push behind Cade that shows you that it doesn't really matter what market he's in, especially because he's in Detroit. He has people that are basically gonna die on that hill, on the Cade Cunningham hill. Like, as long as he continues to play the way he plays and he gives people memories that they're gonna hold on to. Like, I mean, I'm a walking example. At this point, I try to put my fandom aside when I cover the team, but in 2018, Blake Griffin was my guy. Like, that was, and to this day,
I think we lost him for a minute. Okay, guys. It looks like we. Okay.
Yeah, big Gilbert Arenas trying to shut me down, but Underdog heard the word and shut the stream down. But no,
got the black SUVs in the by your house right now.
Sirens. I was like, I don't know what's going on. No, but basically my point is the Pistons are in a market that is so unique that is, in my opinion, the most passionate amongst the NBA. Like, amongst the losing streak last year, they were still getting really, really solid crowds. Like, that's just unheard of. So I wouldn't pay much mind. And I really feel like it's not even worth, discussing.
Yeah. I think a lot of people just don't pay attention to what's happening when it comes to the Pistons. I mean, you can even think about not Gilbert Arenas, but Stephen A. Smith last year. He did that whole spiel about Monty Williams to go and praise the Lord that he's out of Detroit. And that just shows how little attention they pay to small markets. I mean, Stephen A. is not even knowledgeable about guys like SGA and Donovan Mitchell. I mean, he's having an MVP caliber season, but he's getting no push. And I think that's a problem with NBA media, to piggyback off Zariq, is they don't talk about the non-Steph, KD, LeBron. And Steph, KD, LeBron they're great. They're generational. But you have to do a better job of talking about the guys who are actually building a product for the future of the league. And I feel like Cade, I don't understand why a lot of these old head fans don't like him. He plays an old school style of basketball for the most part. It's back to the basket from the point guard position. It's a lot of mid-range stuff. I feel like he should be a lot of these guys' favorite players, but they don't pay enough attention to what's going on. Like Shaq, they had a whole debate about if he was an all-star with one inside the NBA crew, which was some people said the backup crew, because it had I'm forgetting their names, but it wasn't Chuck and Kenny. And he was like, I think Cade's an all-star, but Chuck and Kenny would disagree. And then they had the same debate, and they didn't say it was Cade. And Shaq goes, hell no, Cade ain't an all-star. So it's just stuff like that where I'm just are you really paying attention? Do you even know what you're saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, inside the NBA, like I know Zar touched on it earlier, it's more of an entertainment standpoint. Like those guys are probably the most casual basketball fans. They probably couldn't even name anyone off a bench, like on the Lakers bench right now. They probably couldn't name them, like whatsoever. I think that's why the NBA is looking to get into Amazon and why like Blake Griffin and Dirk are going to start calling games because I think what the NFL does a really good job of is they break down the game in the simplest form for even like maybe someone that's like an amateur fan can understand. And I think the NBA hasn't done a really good job of marketing the game that way, which I think they should. Like one of my favorite YouTube channels is B-Ball Breakdown. They do a really good job of just like, if you want to learn the game, like he kind of teaches you like certain plays, certain sets, certain actions. And I think that's what's kind of missing with the NBA. But Gilbert Arenas comments with Detroit, because I listen to his podcast. I don't even know why I do it. I just do. But I think his biggest reason with Detroit has nothing to do with the Pistons beating his ass when he was a player. It's actually kind of funny. So Detroit was the only city to serve him papers for not paying his child support. So that's what happened in Detroit, because I went and listened to one of his podcasts over the summer. And like when I posted one of his clips, and I think I had the whole city on Detroit say, hey, like come to a barbecue, and there's no barbecue type shit. Like just jump his ass.
yeah.
And he's wearing a Tayshaun Prince jersey like the next day. And he said, oh, the reason why I don't like Detroit is because they served me my papers and I didn't pay my child support. So that's the reason why Gil does not like Detroit, because they allowed a cop to serve him papers.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I think this came up with this whole story he told about Isaiah Stewart, and
Yeah,
how Gilbert will get behind a microphone like this and say one thing and then not have anything to say in real life. So it's interesting. Gilbert moves really, really interestingly, even in his NBA career. But it's when you're an NBA player and you retire and you get a microphone in front of you, you got something to do. So he's got something to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. A lot of NBA players that have podcasts now, like, not to like say that they're not good podcasts, but to be honest, I actually love listening to like guys like Nikias like break down the game, because like to me, I think it's more entertaining, even though like he's never played in the NBA. At least I know it's going to be informative and not just some like crappy hot take that's going to get a bunch of clicks and views on social media. It's wild.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm shitting on players with podcasts, because Carmelo actually has my favorite podcast just in general.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Blake, and that was something I kind of wanted to hit on really quickly, is like if you listen to that podcast, which I recommend any Pistons fan who watched during that period does, because he talks about Detroit a lot in that pod. But he, in his appearance on that show, it's him, Monica McNutt, Carmelo Anthony, and Mero from Desus and Mero, if there's any Bodega Hive out there. But he talks really in depth about just how he views the game and how he views the media side of the game, as well as he's shifting that way. And I feel like that Amazon, NBC, whatever, is going to be really interesting in terms of basketball analysis, because that was something that I feel like JJ Redick was so good at. And I was really sad when he took the Lakers job, because he took the game really seriously. And then in turn, it makes the game more entertaining because you're looking for more than just narratives. And when Blake was talking about it, he goes in depth about ways he would cover the game. And Monica does a great job of asking questions, like specific things, like what he would look for. So I'd recommend that. But it'll be refreshing to have, more people with bigger platforms like an Amazon, like an NBC, with actual care for how the game is being covered, rather than just the entertainment value.
Yeah, I mean they've milked KD, Curry, and LeBron so much to the point like I don't think there's any more milk left, man. Like they're all pushing 35. Like you had the Cavs and OKC Thunder play twice, and I feel like that game should have just been like talked about way more. Like two of the best teams in the East and the West, and like it was crickets on my timeline, like outside of like maybe Cone, if you guys know who that is, who does a good job of just like covering OKC. But like outside of that, man, like I didn't really see any national pundits like get excited for like OKC versus Cleveland, because like those are two of the best teams in the NBA right now, and like no one talked about it whatsoever.
Yeah, it's frustrating because like I think the NFL has it so down when it comes to like how to discuss the game with respect for the game, you know, and not like just because, you know, they could just talk about Patrick Mahomes for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in some respects they do. But at the same time, they still have a respect for, you know, teams that are up and coming, what big matchups there are to look for. And it's really something that I've been craving. And, you know, platforms like us, we can only do so much, right? Like we can only go so far. And it's frustrating when there's like these giant, you know, $1 billion Amazon, like NBC, TNT, ESPN just have none of the same energy when it comes to the NBA, but they love talking about the NBA. But the NBA almost feels like reality TV in the way that it's discussed, is like, oh, this guy, he's not happy there. And there's no actual reporting of, you know, like anybody being happy. Like I've been hearing about Zion wanting to go to New York since the day he got drafted. And there's not yet once been a singular report, like an actual report saying Zion Williamson wants to leave New Orleans, right? Like there's a lot of off the court stuff that's happened, sure, but none of it is like how Jimmy Butler is right now, where he's like, oh yeah, I want out of Miami. I've lost my joy. I can't smile anymore. Like it's none of that. So it's really weird, but that's a whole other tangent. I'll go on certainly sometime.
Yeah, I don't think we could talk about Zion off the court on YouTube Live right now. We'll probably get flagged and taken down in 2 seconds. I'm not going to get into Mariah Mills or being late for flights, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. Like the NBA can be entertaining. You're right. I think the Jimmy Butler thing is probably the most entertaining thing, because I don't even think it's gotten started yet. Like we haven't even heard him like warm up with G League players beating the Heat starters. Like I know it's going to get 10 times more toxic as we get closer to this trade deadline. But I wanted to shift over to a ranking, and Cade Cunningham, I think we could agree, Zar. I think even before the season, you went off on a tangent on the last ringers ranking for him. You went on like a 15-minute just rant. I just let you go in your bag, because that video to this day is still getting views, still getting comments about you talking about Cade Cunningham. But he did get an updated ranking. Now he's 28th, but here are some of the players that are still ranked above him, and I'll name them off for you: Damian Lillard, Kyrie Irving, Tyrese Halliburton, LaMelo Ball, Franz Wagner, Evan Mobley, and Jalen Williams. So what do you think of the Ringers' new top 100 player list? And do you think Cade is properly rated? And if he's not, where do you think he should be ranked at?
I think it's interesting because I want to do this with respect to the players in front of him, because I don't want to make it seem like, you know, it's this thing where it's not even a discussion. Like Franz Wagner deserves his respect. Jalen Williams deserves his respect. Who else did you say?
Damian Lillard, Kyrie Irving,
of course. Like, yeah. With all that said, you cannot tell me that Jalen Williams is more influential to his team's success than Cade is. You cannot tell me that a Damian Lillard, even at this current day and age, is as influential to his team's success as Cade Cunningham is, because he has a Giannis with him. You know, like you can't. And LaMelo, it's so interesting because I'm a huge LaMelo Ball fan. I have been. I think you can pull up tweets from mine like in 2019 where I'm saying like how I'd take LaMelo Ball number 1 overall. Has done no winning since like I think the COVID restrictions were like fully lifted. You know, like it's been a long time since we've even seen LaMelo Ball even in a play-in situation, and it's fine, right? Like he's playing great. He's playing out of his mind, and I think the discussion of, you know, if you put LaMelo Ball on a winning team, like he's not going to be the same guy. I think that's stupid. I think he's the same player regardless of where he is. But at the same time, the argument of your team not winning is still something that should be a factor if it was used against Cade last year. And it just boggles my mind that, like, a LaMelo is likely to start the All-Star game while his team is the worst in the Eastern Conference. It's a battle between them and Washington, right? Like it's a battle to the bottom. And the fact that LaMelo, as great as he's been, I'm not taking anything away from how great he's been, but if you're going to use the argument of team success mattering, how does it not matter when it comes to him, but it matters when it comes to Cade? Like Cade had a great season last year, regardless of how horrible that season went. He had a pretty great season. And I'm sure if they were even in a little more serious of a situation, he would have averaged more than the 22 points that he did. And I just feel like now you're seeing Cade in a more serious situation where his team has the chance to not only make the play-in, but the playoffs, right? It's really mind-boggling that an ESPN and a Bleacher Report can be like, hey, guys, look at Cade. Like, he's been so awesome lately. Like, the minute the Pistons really start winning, Cade Cunningham, like, get on, ESPN today and get on this interview with Funny Marco. And, like, they're in the NBA. I want to do like an actual look at this, but since the Pistons West Coast trip, I want to say they have posted Cade more frequently than like 97% to 98% of the NBA. Like, he gets a post when he just does like a layup now, right? Like it's insane. So it's weird to me that like he can get this push and still by certain outlets be seen as the player they saw him as last year. Like, obviously it's an improvement in ranking, but you can't tell me that you weren't thinking, oh yeah, I mean, it's good, but we haven't seen that next step yet, right? Because like, how are you going to tell me with a straight face Franz Wagner has had a better season than Cade Cunningham has, or that Franz Wagner is more valuable than Cade Cunningham is? Because you can't, right? Like, and I like Franz. He's a really good NBA player. In no world is he a better NBA player than Cade Cunningham, though. Like, I really feel like, sure, like, I'm not saying Cade's like, top 5 right now or anything like that, but when he's 9th in MVP rankings, it makes no sense for him to be 28th as your 28th best player in the NBA. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so weird. Like, the inconsistency in discourse is really confusing, because one side of the media goes, oh, Cade's really like, he's an MVP candidate, we're posting him every day, and then the other's like, oh yeah, I just don't know if he's a winning player. It's his LeBron is not actually as good as it could be. Like, it's just like, it's so his VORP. Like, I don't know like what we're doing here sometimes.
I mean, maybe he needs a brother to, have a hit out. It's got 20 million views on Spotify. I mean, Cade's got no tweaker. So
the corner has not been swerved. Whoa.
Yeah, I don't get it. I think I don't know if you guys probably like watched the Marco interview, but like Cade kind of made like a 67 joke to Marco. He's like, yeah, you're probably like the 67th best. Like, he had like identical numbers to Paulo, like identical, and he still did not make the All-Star team last year. Like, last year's roster was last year's roster, but he's been putting up those stats since his rookie year. Like, the second half of his rookie year, he was putting up like, 27 and 5. And people are still like, well, he's not winning. Now that he's winning, they're like, well, you've been beating bad teams. That 5-game winning streak was kind of a fluke. Like, you were beating like Brooklyn's and Portland's. It's just like, there's no consistency. You're right. Like, how can he be top 10 in MVP talks? But at the end of the day, you have players like Franz, Dame shouldn't even be top 30 in my opinion. Like, if it wasn't for Giannis, like, I think Dame would probably be like in the 50s personally. That's just like where he's at in his career. Obviously, he's a really good player, but I don't think Dame's better than Cade Cunningham. Like, if you gave Cade to Giannis, he'd probably be like a top 10, maybe top 5 player in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know like where it comes from, and it's I try to like watch and listen to and read as many things as I can, especially regarding my coverage of this team, just to get a sense for how the general NBA world is feeling about the Detroit Pistons. And one thing I hear a lot is like, oh, it's good, but is he going to stay healthy? And it's weird because they talk about him sometimes like he's Zion when it comes to his health. Like, oh, like, yeah, it's nice, but like, how long is this going to last? Like, Cade missed one season with a shin injury that he elected to get surgery on. Like, he could have just held off and not gotten it, right? But he did. And that injury seemingly has been fixed. Like, he played 66 games last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think he would have played a lot more if the games they were playing meant literally anything.
Yeah.
So it's really, and then even like his rookie year, like they're like, oh yeah, he's been injured since his rookie year. Like, okay, he had the ankle injury in the summer. Cool. He got back and played pretty much the entire season. You know, like once he was back, it wasn't like he was often missing time. Like, I think he got COVID. Can't really do anything about that. So it's just really weird. Like, when we talk about inconsistency, like, I don't understand where some of these things come from. It's like, I feel like, and it oftentimes comes from like the outlets that consider themselves to be like the smarter ones. You know what I mean? Like the kind of like, you know, pushing my glasses back, like I know everything type of outlet. And like, it just surprises me because that just, you're telling on yourself at that point. Like, how are you going to say, okay, Cunningham, yeah, this is good. This little stretch he's been on, but he's going to stay healthy because he's not been healthy his whole career. I'm like, what are we talking about? He had one season, and that injury wasn't like oh, like he randomly got hurt. Like that was something that's been lingering since high school, apparently, that he chose to get surgery on. Yeah, it's weird, and I don't understand the Cade discourse. It's gotten better. I'll give it credit. Like people are starting to come around and see that Cade is actually. Dude, when I said Cade was a generational prospect a few weeks ago, maybe a little over a month ago, and I said that him and Victor Wembanyama were the only two generational keyword prospects since like 2020, I got shit on. I got how are you going to call Cade Cunningham generational? Have you seen Paulo? Blah, blah, blah. Have you seen Anthony Edwards? I'm like, yes, I have. They're great. Don't get me wrong. They're great. But in terms of prospect meaning the player they were leading up to the NBA, I'm really puzzled to see that like Cade is only now starting to get the hype that he deserves. You know, like it's a thing of I think he was given, I forgot where specifically he was given, but he was given the best grade possible a prospect could get. Mike Schmitz called him, and Mike Schmitz, by the way, no longer works for ESPN because he was hired as a draft specialist for the Portland Trailblazers. Mike Schmitz called him the most complete prospect he ever analyzed
since LeBron.
Yeah, since LeBron. And I'm supposed to say that, well, yeah, he wasn't a generational prospect. Like, it's a thing of Franz Wagner is very good, right? At no point in his career do I ever think he will be ever considered generational at anything. Even at leading up to his time at University of Michigan. Not generational, right? Very good role player, high-end role player, like likely to make an all-star team or two. I don't think he's ever going to be a perennial all-NBA, like, you know, 1A on a championship team. So it's just, it's weird. I'm going on the tangent again, but like, it's just, it just blows my mind how Cade gets, you know, discussed.
Yeah, I remember what set you off last time. Do you remember what player that set you off last time that he got compared to?
I can't remember.
Bradley Beal.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, no, that checks out. And I mean, even now, like, look at Phoenix, right? Like, I was just in attendance yesterday for clarity, but I was able to see the Phoenix bench the entire game. The vibe, like the vibes, the general feeling. Nobody stands up on that bench. Nobody claps for each other. Nobody's excited. Nobody. I've seen us home. It looked like this, and they were winning at points. You know, they ultimately won the game.
Yeah.
And I get, like, you know, certain guys maybe are more nonchalant, but like at the end of the day, when your team is doing well, you're supposed to encourage each other. And you know, Bradley Beal, who I like more than most people, is part of that. You know, like it's just there's certain guys that should be. And like if Cade came out and just shit his pants in the NBA, right? He just sucked. Okay, sure. He has been given the worst circumstances possible and has consistently looked like not only a great player, but a great leader, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, all the things that like LeBron gets in terms of like, oh, there's no off the court drama. There's no da-da-da-da. And I'm not saying he's LeBron or anything, but like, you should get pushed as such rather than just get these random like nicks in your armor that make no sense. Like it's never made sense to me.
Yeah, I don't get it. You have anything to add, Zay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna pick a gripe with a couple guys there. Jalen Williams, look, I think he's a good player. I think, to some fans, he's underrated. To the casual Shaq, Charles Barkley kind of guy, they probably don't know much about Jalen Williams, and he's a good player. But there's this kind of fan who really thinks Jalen Williams is like this franchise player. And it's like how he said, like, there's the people who just think like all these advanced stats tell the full story. But you look at Jalen Williams, he would not be what he is without SGA. Jalen Williams will never be a number one on a good team to me. I think he's a good secondary guy, maybe on a championship team. I mean, he's doing that right now, but he will never be better than Cade. I think it's like this new fan who, he's active on TikTok. So there's a lot of fans of him who would just like see him comment on TikTok or repost videos. And like Cade's not on social media as much. And I think a lot of fans aren't familiar with Cade's game just because some fans don't even watch the games. They just like watch edits. Yeah. And then another guy was Sabonis. I just have never been that big on Sabonis myself. But to say that he's been better than Cade this year, I don't understand it. I think he's having a great year. Sabonis is, and no one's talking about it, obviously. But he will never be a number one on a team. In Indy, when he was at he's playing fine in Indy, Oladipo was the number one on that team. And then he got to Sacramento, and I mean, Fox is still the number one there. And I think if you put Sabonis on a team with talent equivalent to Detroit or Jalen Williams, they are not 21-21 through this point in the season. They're maybe 15-27 at best to me.
Yeah, the discord with Cade, I think it's more of a Detroit discourse the more I think about it, because like, look how much Blake had to do to like make a all, I think, third team NBA. Like there was a point that he was shooting better from three than Kevin Durant that year. No one talked about it like whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like Detroit doesn't get the same media coverage as I think the media markets as they should. And I don't know if that's because of the bad boys. I don't know if it's because Malice at the Palace. I just don't know what it is. It seems like it's just a bias against just Detroit sports teams and like Detroit markets. And what we talked earlier, like the last segment of like Detroit's not a small market. It's one of the bigger markets, sports markets, like in just the NBA. I mean, like saw what the Tigers did, like when they went on like that crazy run, like Comerica Park was sold out. Like when they were going on that run, and like the Tigers, for what it's worth, like it was a really good story. And I think everyone in the city was just like behind them, but like Pistons are the 8 seed right now. And it still feels like people aren't excited about it. Like they're still using COVID fake defense chants at arenas because fans don't chant defense. It's so weird.
So that's actually something I really wanted to talk about. And it's really, really odd to me. And I was talking actually with my dad about this because my dad's a season ticket holder for the Pistons. So he always sees the crowds and everything like that. I feel as if, and this is going to piss off some people, and I'm aware of that. I feel as if basketball isn't very casual viewer friendly. And when I mean casual viewer, I don't just mean like in the sense that we've been talking lately, where it's like, oh, your Shaqs and Chucks and Ken. Not like that. I mean casual in the sense of you're going to a game, but you don't really care about the sport that you're viewing. Like I was saying like the Lions, right? Like they are the heartbeat of this city's sports fandom. Like the city lives and dies by the Detroit Lions, good or bad. It makes sense to me that the people who don't know much about sports can pile on in the Lions fandom because you kind of know the cues. You know when to cheer, you know when to be mad, Like if a flag gets thrown, you can, like, oh, the refs are screwing us type of thing. And it could be a good call, right? Like it's an easy thing to just kind of throw on as background viewing. It's like a thing where, like, you can go to a game and a few hours before the game, you can tailgate and get drunk and you won't remember the game that actually happened in front of you. The Tigers, like, don't get me wrong, the playoff atmosphere was great. A lot of people that go to Tigers games are not watching the game. Like, they're there for a hot dog, they're there for a few beers, and they're there because it's nice outside. Like, I think there's a thing with the Lions that is easy to pile on. Like, it's easy to get excited because your grandpa, watched the Lions. So, like, you always kind of had it on the background. But basketball in Michigan is really weird because I feel like there is obviously a really diehard aspect of it. Like, they still have a really diehard fan base. But at the same time, it's almost like divided. Like, I have been to games where I would say yesterday's crowd with Phoenix was around like 80% full. I have been to games where it's like 60, 70%. And it is much louder. It is much more like palpable, like tangible. You can feel like the energy around you. Like, I was at the Pacers game, and like this guy near where I was taking pictures was going at some member of the Indiana. I think he was just like an Indiana Pacers like scout or something. He was just wearing like Pacers gear, and he's like, "Yeah, you better not come around here wearing Pacers gear. We don't see you around here. Like, we don't want to see you." It was a whole thing, and he went at him for like 10 straight minutes. It was hilarious. But there is like that diehard section of the Pistons fan base. The people that watch this podcast, for example, like, they're probably pretty diehard to be watching an hour and 31 minutes into a Pistons podcast. But at the same time, the people that show up on days like yesterday, where the Lions game was after, it felt like they just got the ticket because it was something to do, but they don't actually know what's happening in front of them. And because of the pace of the NBA and how modern NBA basketball is played, you really have to understand like what you're watching in order to be invested in what you're watching, especially in like a slower paced game. Because yesterday was a back and forth game, but KD's not a guy that's going to go out there and like, light up the game with athleticism like even like a prime LeBron or like a Zion, a John Morant. He's not that. Like, his thing's always been like, smooth criminal. Like, he's finesse. He's a jump shot, but he's not like pulling up from 40 like Steph does. And I noticed actually there was a specific family, and I don't know their names or anything, but there was a specific family that I was watching throughout the game. It sounds insane, but there's a specific family that I was like paying attention to, that were all in Lions gear, and they had really close seats. And I know those seats are really expensive. Sat on their hands the entire game. Excitement, like Pistons up, Pistons down, nothing. Defense chant, nothing. And I look around, and the most people that were not making any noise on their phones, looking off to the side, were in Lions jerseys. And I hate that I'm being made, because I've been noticing I get a lot of shit from Lions fans. I am a Lions fan, right? But I also don't like the entitlement that comes with the Lions fandom as a whole, because it overall is just the general casual viewer. And it's tough. I think once the Pistons become hot, like the Lions are hot, because like even though they're like 8th right now, they won't get the same respect or noise that the Lions get until they're like 2nd, 3rd. It's not going to happen until Cade's like top 3 in MVP discussions, not even top 10. And it's unfortunate. Like I that was the reason I started making content in the first place, was because I felt like Blake Griffin was getting not enough love. That was the whole reason I ever started this path. So it's unfortunate, but it's the nature of the beast, I feel.
Yeah, the fake defense COVID machine. I was like, bro, there's no way we're still using that. There's no way. It's so bad.
You'll hear a chance, you'll look around, and you're like, who's saying this? Like they used to do the thing where it's like, hey, yo, the Queen chant. You look around and you hear like the chant in response, and you're like, nobody's saying it. And it's unfortunate. Like these, especially this season, these are games that fans really get lucky to watch. Like, these are back and forth games. Cade's often like at least above 20 points, usually in a double-double and assists. And you get to see the other team's best when they come to play the Detroit Pistons because it's always a really competitive game.
Yeah.
And I feel like fans, for the most part, don't care until it's the fourth quarter. And even then, and this is my last thing I'll say on this, yesterday's game, it was tied. But once it hit 3-4 minutes, there was a legitimately like large section of the fans left.
Yeah.
Tied, started heading for the exit to beat traffic. So it just talks to the respect that this team gets, and it's unfortunate that like it's gotten to this point because there was a point where the Pistons were number one, but it might have just been because the Lions were just so bad at the time.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, like we've been on for over an hour and a half. There's over 800 people in here right now. Like I consider those people like diehard fans and like, people in the live chat right now. But it's just, I've been thinking about it. It's just like, yeah, I think we could stop with the fake like COVID, like 2K noise machines type things. But to your point, yeah, like that game, and I know exactly what family you're talking about because I was watching the game from home, and I think they were front row. If maybe it's the same family, I don't know.
Different, but I'm sure it's the same sentiment regardless.
They like the energy was really low, and it probably didn't do any favors that like they interviewed Tarek Skubal, and he's like, yeah, I don't give a fuck who wins. He's like, I'm a Devin Booker fan. And I was like, bro, wow. Yeah, he's like, I don't care. He's like, it's a win-win. He's just like, if the Pistons win, cool. The Suns win, cool. I'm from Phoenix anyways. I really don't care who wins. I was like, oh, okay. That's where you're at.
I mean, I guess that's a fair perspective for him. Like even when, ironically, the Pistons and Suns played at the Breslin, there was more people wearing the Ishbia, like, Izone shirts than there were people in Pistons merchandise. It's just it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know we went on like a little tangent there, but it's just like I don't understand it. Like I think to your point, unless the Pistons are winning like 40-50 games a year, this fan base is just not going to be engaged whatsoever. I mean, even like when we made the playoffs, Blake's year, like game 3, I would say it was just as loud as when they made the playoffs at the Palace with like Andre and KCP and all those guys. Like that's like the electric crowds that I remember growing up, like watching like the Going to Work crew. But like no one cheers. You hear more Jared Goff cheers than like MVP or Cade Cunningham, but I don't think we have to worry about those Jared Goff chants for a minute.
Yeah, it's tough. And I feel like you'll see the best of this fan base when it comes to the, I really feel like it's an inevitability that this team gets some form of postseason play and hopefully home court. But you'll see that when they're in the playoffs. But it's really going to be important, especially for the Gilbert Arenases of the world, for that discourse to finally die, for the fans to kind of be that 1 through 82 rather than the last 4 to 8, so.
Yeah. We have one more topic. And it's Cade Cunningham again, obviously, because I feel like Cade and JB did a lot of media this week. Like I was not expecting JB to go on Wake Up, which I absolutely loved. But this last topic is Cade Cunningham. And he was ranked 9th in MVP talks from NBA.com. So Zay, I'll let you go. With this topic, like what were your just overall thoughts when you saw Cade Cunningham crack a top 10 in MVP talks?
I mean, I'm glad he's finally in those talks because he should have been in there about 2 weeks ago. But I mean, of course, it comes with winning. I think he should be higher. If I remember correctly, and I mean, I picked a gripe on him earlier, but I think Sabonis was above him on this list, and I think Alperen Sengun was above him on this list. I think he should at least be 7. I mean, you take Sengun off the Rockets, they're still a very good team. You take Sabonis off the Kings, they still have Fox, they still have Monk, they still have Herter, they still have DeRozan. Like, they're still a very good team. You take Cade off this team, and it's Malik Beasley as your number 1 option. Like, there's a big difference between these teams, and I think I'm glad Cade finally got some recognition in MVP talks. Even though, our crowd only chanted MVP for him 1 game all season so far, at least that I've been to. But I mean, he should be higher to me.
Yeah, I feel like I've said everything I can about Cade at this point. But it's not a surprise to me that, you know, he was eventually put in there, because I feel like this, like Zayon said, like I feel like this discourse should have been here, right? But it does come with winning, and I think in order for him to climb that ladder, I don't think he's going to finish, you know, top 3 even in MVP voting. But do I think if the Pistons continue on their current pace, do I think he deserves to finish top 5 in MVP voting? Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of the Shea discourse from I want to say that 2022-23 season, where the Thunder really, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the season where they started to make some noise towards the play-in. And I remember that James Edwards on RIP, the Bunning Cardigan show, would talk about how he sees Shea as like the NBA's most valuable player, like not a Jokic, not an Embiid. Like he saw Shea as that guy, and this was before, you know, this was a popular take. Like, you know, now Shea's like firmly in that discussion, but at that time it wasn't. And he kept saying, like, you know, you take Shea off of this OKC team, like what are they? You know, like what are they doing without him? And you know what Zayon said, like it's true. Like when you simply analyze it in the terms of the words used, most valuable player, I'd be hard pressed to find a more valuable player to their team than Cade Cunningham is, in terms of just being respectable versus and being in the playoffs versus not. You know, like there isn't, like, Embiid won MVP. His team, and oh man, I don't want to go on the Embiid thing, but his team has to consistently perform with the expectation that he might not be available the next game. You know, Jokic, I think, obviously still has his case, and I think this Denver team is nowhere near as good, especially now without Nikola Jokic. But at the same time, I just feel like Cade should be in like that top 5 discussion, just because the numbers he's putting up are MVP worthy, and I also feel like in terms of value, there isn't a player really that's more valuable to their team's success.
Yeah, I'll just read off the list for people that are wondering, that are watching live and might listen to the audio side later. So they have SGA 1, Jokic 2, Giannis 3, Karl Anthony Towns 4, which is kind of surprising. He is having a good season, but I don't think he's top 4 in MVP talks. Victor Wembanyama 5, Jason Tatum 6, Donovan Mitchell 7, Alperen Sengun 8, Cade 9, and Anthony Davis 10. So, I mean, that's the updated MVP ladder, which, I mean, I feel like you could make a case for each one of those guys. But, I mean, I think the one thing that Cade has in common with Jokic and even Giannis to an extent is they are such high usage players. And if you take them off their basketball teams, they look completely different. Like, Zay, you said like Malik Beasley's probably like the first option on this team, which he probably is. Like I think sometimes Pistons fans take Cade for granted, especially if he has a rough night like he did the past 2 games. Like if Cade gets injured or there's a stretch of games where he's out, like the season's probably over. And like any type of play-in or playoff hopes, you know, I don't want him to get injured, but if he does, like it's probably over. Just the impact that he has on this basketball team night in and night out. I think more people should consider him for starting the All-Star game and making an All-NBA team, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'll get a little feisty here. I think Cade might be better without Jaden Ivey. That's just a little hot take. I mean, you just look at the numbers. I don't think it's Ivy. I think Ivy's a great player. I think he's a very good player. I mean, he was at 40% from 3 on like 5 attempts a game. Like that's a positive player. But I think his play style is just a little too I don't really know how to explain, but I think he's a little too erratic to play next to Cade. And I think part of like the reason I think he's in these rankings now versus before is because he gets to do a lot more of the other stuff that he couldn't really do with Ivy, because Ivy is not great off the ball, but he's also not he's not amazing on the ball like as a number 1. I think long term Jaden Ivey's probably a 6th man, and I think Cade being 9 in those MVP rankings, that's why I'm so pro LaVine. You know, me and you get into it sometimes about this, but I think when you have a player that's that good and Ivy's still got a couple like question marks, I don't know how much more of his career you want to risk, you know, not wasting, but like how much more of his career you want him treading the water versus, you know, really making a push.
I've had a lot of guests on this show. I feel like the only other guest that I get in with Ivy stuff is a friend of both of ours. It's Easy. Easy is probably the president of the Jaden Ivy I don't like him club. I'm not saying that you don't like him, Zay. I can understand where you're coming from. I think they complement each other. But to your point, Cade probably is 9th in MVP discussions because he has to do more and he has to damn near average 30 points a game to give this Pistons team a chance to win basketball games, which I think Cade is capable of, scoring 30, but I also think he's capable of setting up his teammates and giving you 22. I just think as a basketball player, there's so many avenues of which he can play because you need him to score, he can score. You need him to facilitate, you can do that. You need him to come up with a big block, which he had last night, which absolutely loved. I think he can do that. I think his defense this year is drastically improved. Not a lot of people have been talking about that. But I don't hate where your head is at with like Cade flourishing more without Ivy. I understand where you're coming from, but I know that's probably going to piss a lot of fans off. I can already hear the comments or read the comments after this is over. But hey, man, I love it. I love that you have that take. And I like LaVine as a player, but I know his contract is expiring in a few years. I just wonder, if they were, hypothetically to trade for him, what happens to Ivy? Is Ivy okay with coming off the bench when, statistically, this is probably his best career playing with Cade Cunningham in the backcourt?
Yeah, I definitely think Ivy's he's a good player. I'm not a Jaden Ivy hater anymore. I was for a little bit, but I haven't been. He was on a good stretch before he got hurt. But I think if you did trade for LaVine, Jaden Ivy would be even better coming off the bench because then you have Cade, you have another high-level scorer like LaVine, and then you have Ivy off the bench. That's a lot for defenses to handle and game plan for. So if you could get a high-level scorer like LaVine and you get to hold on to Ivy and he buys into that 6-man role, I think that's dangerous, like how the Kings use Malik Monk. But I'm not sure Ivy would buy into that role after last season. And, he undeservingly got that role behind Killian Hayes. So that's a whole different thing.
I mean, that was more of a Monty thing. And I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole because, Pistons Reddit had a theory why Ivy didn't start. I'm not even going to repeat it. I've repeated it on this podcast before, but it's just galaxy brain next level thinking. But I would love LaVine on this team. It's just that I wonder, contractually, what would the Pistons bench look like? Because with LaVine comes a bigger contract for a couple of years. You have Cade's, contract going into effect next season, and then you probably can't retain a Malik Beasley. Who knows what the bench looks like? You might have a high octane offense, but the bench might suffer. So that's probably my only question. Then you have to also consider, what are you going to give Ivy this summer for a contract extension? Because I think he's going to get one, and I think it'll probably be over $100 million in my opinion.
Yeah, I think. I mean, maybe this is just me undervaluing him. I'll let Zariq give his take. I think Ivy's probably at about, at least I would value him at about 18 to 24 mil annually, and rookie extension is 4 years? Because he's not going to get a super max. So yeah, probably about 4 years, about 100 million ish. I think 25 is a 25, 27 is probably the max I'd go, just because, I mean, if you're paying a guy 30 mil, I think you would want to see a little bit more out of him on both ends. But that's just my take. I don't know. I'll let go.
Well, I was going to say it is actually 5 years now, regardless of Supermax.
Okay.
But I like Cade and Asar together, but I feel like they're not ready for it right now.
No.
I don't know if I can go as far to say that Cade is better without Ivy, right? But I do feel like since last season, and obviously last season, it's hard to analyze and it's hard to evaluate. But in Ivy's best stretches, especially last year, it felt like it happened in games where Cade was less on ball. Like, he did less, and it didn't really feel like it was maximizing both of their play styles. But I do feel like, especially on that West Coast road trip, like you really started to see both of them kind of be that 1-2 punch that, everybody always envisioned them being. So
Yeah.
I can't really go as far as saying like they don't, they're not, one's better without the other. I do think individually they're both good players. And I think, if it were to ever happen where, they're separate on separate teams, I'm sure they both would still look good, maybe even better. But I do think they can work together. In terms of what you kind of evaluate Jaden Ivey as, like contract wise, that's going to be difficult. It's kind of like the Colin Sexton situation a few years ago, which is ironic because I mentioned him earlier, but it's interesting because he's coming off of a pretty, gruesome injury that really affects his play style because, when like Cade underwent the shin thing, I don't think there was a lot of concern about what he's going to look like when he comes back. Like, I'm sure there was like, he'll surely have like a slow start. Maybe he gained weight and it'll be, whatever. But Cade's game has never really relied on athleticism much, but I'm sure there is, and there's no tear, there's no anything. So it's as good of a break as you can hope in terms of almost season-ending injuries that can happen to someone. But at the same time, I'm sure there's still concern about what's he going to look like, when he comes back. I know there's belief that, he'll be the same guy. And, I obviously hope the same, but that's not a guarantee. And unless you see him by the end of the season, it might be a little bit scary to give a 4 or 5 year deal to someone you haven't seen play since a season-ending injury. And at the end of the day, basketball is a business, and everyone in the NBA is aware of this. So it's going to be interesting to see how that's evaluated. I think prior to the injury, he definitely talked his way into the 20 plus. I think he's out of the teens in terms of the extension.
Yeah.
When you factor in the injury, that's the only thing that kind of, makes things a bit complicated. I do think you could have an Ivy and Levine on the court at the same time, for what it's worth, if that ever happened. Because I feel like Ivy at this point is used to kind of playing an off-ball role when he has to. So having someone like a Zach LaVine kind of take those touches just adds another dynamic score. So it's a thing where I don't really see an issue with it. But that's just my take on it. I feel like Ivy pre-injury, I would say he was anywhere from like $23 to $28 million annually, which is a pretty good deal for everything that he's gone through in his career, from going from a really impressive rookie season to having possibly one of the most confusing NBA seasons we have ever seen. At least I have, because I've never seen a guy go from, all rookie to being punished for no apparent reason and sent to the end of the bench. Like Duncan Smith, the OG of Pistons Twitter, if there's any Duncan Smith appreciators in the chat at this point. He always makes the joke, like, he's like, man, I've never seen improvement from an 11th man like I have from Jaden Ivey this year. So it's interesting. He's had such a tough career to really evaluate as a contract, like in terms of giving contracts. And the Pistons are really financially savvy, so I'm sure they're going to be aware of these things when it comes to contract discussions. But I do feel like the two of them can work.
Yeah, I do too. I think I've been pretty consistent with my Ivy stuff. I think the backcourt can work. Like right before he got injured, man, he was like shooting like 50% from three. Like the catch and shoot numbers were really good. I've always mentioned, like, a lot of people mention Zach LaVine. I think if you give Ivy a little bit more time, I'm not saying they'll be the same player. I'm not saying they're the same athlete. But I think in terms of like bucket getters, obviously you'd like his numbers around the rim to be a little bit higher, especially with the type of athlete he is and the first step. But I don't really think him getting injured is really going to affect his contract. Like, I'm probably the worst person in terms of like guessing contracts. I thought that Simone was going to get $20 million a year. Boy, was I wrong. Me and Pistons thought that he was going to get like 15, 20 million a year. We were dead wrong. But I think Ivy could get anywhere from 100, maybe 125 million with an extension. Maybe he has that Jalen Green year where, you know, he doesn't take the full 5, maybe he takes 3 just to kind of figure it out and see if he wants to, you know, be a part of the Detroit Pistons long term, which I'm sure he does, but maybe, you know, you get more guaranteed money up front and the contract's a little bit more hefty. I know it gets really messy when you mention Jaden Ivey because he's probably one of the most polarizing Piston players. I mean, we even got fake Jaden Ivey accounts on Twitter. I mean, like, I don't even know who that kid is, but like, just delete your account at this point. I mean, like the fact that like, we got people that work for the Detroit Pistons, like, have reached out to me. They're like, who the hell is that? I said, I don't know. I have no idea who it is. Like, it's kind of wild that we have like fake Jaden Ivey stan accounts on Twitter, but kind of wrap this up. Like, I think Jaden Ivey can work. I think Zach LaVine's would just elevate this team in terms of having like a bucket getter and scoring. I think the offense would be really high, like octane offense, and like Cade or LaVine, like that would probably be just a nightmare defensively to try to prepare for night in and night out. But we'll have to wait and see like what happens with this trade deadline, like what they do, what Ivey's future holds, which I think the Detroit Pistons and Trajan probably saw enough to keep him here long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, as soon as we mentioned Jaden Ivey, like I don't know what happened. Like we went from like 800 viewers to 865. Like they were waiting. Yeah, so, I don't know what the hell happened. Like you just say his name, and they're like, "What? Wait, you talking shit again?" Like what? It's crazy, but we've been almost on for 2 hours, which I did not expect. I do apologize, you guys. I don't know if you guys have like stuff to do, homework, anything like that, but. I do want to give you guys the floor to plug and promote your social media and also plug and promote RealBullyBall because I know both of you guys do work over there on that platform.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want to take any questions from the chat?
Yeah, we can do that if you guys have a couple.
Yeah, we can take a couple.
Okay. This one actually comes from Wheezy, who's been in the chat. He wanted to know who is the perfect two-way stretch power forward that's closer that we want to trade for.
Stretch point forward for me, that perfect one would be Laurie. I mean, he's not able to be traded this year, but I feel like Laurie would be that kind of player. I'll let Zariq.
Obviously, I like the perfect fit on this team is not available, right? Like I think Apollo would be perfect, right? But like that's not happening. I do think Lauri Markkanen would be a great fit. I think I know Zayon said he saw some similarities with Kuzma and Ingram, but I feel like Ingram would honestly be a great fit. Now I know he's not necessarily known as a closer, but he handles the ball really well. There was points in New Orleans where he was their lead ball handler. He's a great scorer. I feel like he has a great on paper fit with this team. Do I think the trade's going to happen this year? Absolutely not. But on paper, I think Ingram would be a great fit here.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking just like stretch 4, obviously Lauri Markkanen makes the most sense. I think a lot of Pistons fans have wanted Lauri Markkanen for quite some time, but good luck getting him away from Danny Ainge. Like that's not going to happen. Like you would probably have to give away like all your prospects, and Tom Gores would probably have to like sell like 50% of a stake of owning the Detroit Pistons. Like Danny Ainge is like the worst GM to deal with. I mean, the guy wants 2 firsts for Walker Kessler. I mean, like imagine what he wants for like a Lauri Markkanen. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. If you want to go a tier below, I think there are some stretch power forward bigs, maybe you do a Kelly Olynyk reunion. I mean, I know he didn't get to play with Cade a whole lot because Cade did get injured that year, but, Kelly can stretch the floor, play defense, run some DHOs. I don't know if you go and trade for this guy because he's part of the Miami Heat, and he's a shell of himself, but Kevin Love, I mean, like he can still shoot the shit out the ball. Like I remember a few years ago that he just went berserk on the Pistons when he was on the Cavs, when JB was coaching them, and like he had like 30 points and like we could not guard him during our rebuilding phase. But I mean, like if you kind of want to like buy low on like stretch bigs, like a Kevin Love or a Kelly O, may be an option. Yeah, like it like I love Laurie, but like I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah, definitely not.
No, that's a dream target though.
Yeah, for sure. This is a question about Duren. This comes from King. He said, "Is it me or is Duren the most expendable player on our core? He seems lazy and only turns it on when he wants to. I think it's best for both sides if he relocates." It's a little drastic of a question, so I'll just kind of rephrase it. Do you think the Pistons possibly look to, move on from him? Maybe it's this season, maybe it's this summer.
Well, I mean, he's up for an extension this summer, same with Ivy, and
Yeah.
I really don't know what that number is looking like. I highly doubt it's anything over like 12, maybe 15. He hasn't taken the strides you want him to defensively. I think offensively, there's a little bit of untapped potential there. I think he's a really, really, really underrated passer. He's constantly making great reads when he does have the ball on offense, but then he'll also have plays where, he gets it in the post and he doesn't really have too many post moves. It's just a lot of bully ball. No pun intended. And then to the point that he seems lazy and turns it on when he wants to. I feel like if you watch literally any big man in like the history of the league, most starting big men only turn it on when they get the ball. Like that was a thing that happened with Drummond. Like he needed the ball early to really lock in defensively. And I think Duren has been locked in defensively more. And that's why we're winning so many games, is because that's less of a liability on defense. But I can see why you would think it's best for both sides if he relocates, because if you just keep treading water like Duren's with his like production, I feel like there is a point where you might be better with a fresh start.
Yeah, Duren's a weird player to evaluate because like there are games where like he really turns it on. Like the in-season tournament game against the Pacers is like probably one of his like better games. But I think a thing with him defensively is like where his hands are at when he's trying to defend. Guards see that and they're like, hey, watch this. Like I'm about to get him on a foul. Like his hand placement, like in pick and rolls, I think needs improvement. Offensively, like I don't know if it was you, Zar, that brought this up. Might have been, someone else. But like if Cade isn't getting him involved, like he doesn't really score a whole lot by himself. Like that's not really like an issue. But if you want to be a post player, like I think he needs to develop a face-up game. We've heard from former coaches like Rasheed Wallace that he has a face-up game. I know Eric Vincent does a really good job of like posting videos of him like pregame, and he's working on like post moves and 15-footers, but we never see him shoot 15-footers. So I don't know if that's a work in progress, or maybe the coaching staff just wants him to play a certain role. But I think if the Pistons were to trade Jalen Duren, I don't really know what the value is. It might be pretty low considering how he's played this season.
Yeah, I guess this is where I throw in like stuff I know. I don't think they are looking to trade Jalen Duren at this point, and I think that's also why he hasn't been moved from the starting lineup. I feel like this is an organization that really values the potential of Jalen Duren. And I think internally there is like I don't know, like, like obviously there's acknowledgement that yes, Defensively, he's nowhere near where you want him to be. And even offensively, he hasn't really reached that ceiling or near that ceiling where, I feel like a lot of people know he can go. But there is a feeling of like, I feel like if we let him go, he might find that somewhere else. And I don't think Detroit is, at least right now, trying to take that risk. And I there's been times where I really feel like, especially, when Detroit's going up against someone like a Miles Turner or, like those stretch bigs that like, Duran often has problems with. I feel like in those scenarios, it'd really benefit them to start Isaiah Stewart. But I really feel like they are hesitant because they have such high belief in Jalen Duran. And it is understandable. He has all the tools to really be the center that this team needs. It's just that it hasn't been put together yet. And it's interesting because, like, I don't know if it's necessarily a want or a lazy thing. Sometimes I really just feel like he has heavy feet, like he has heavy feet. He can't really move extremely like laterally very fast. Vertically, obviously, he's an insane vertical spacer, but he's not extremely fast, right? And that's why he gets lost when it comes to those stretch bigs, because I genuinely just feel like he has heavy feet right now. And I feel like the thing with having heavy feet as someone with heavy feet, a lot of times you're aware of this, so you are less disciplined when you're guarding someone. When you get a pump fake, you're more likely to jump at it just because you don't want to give up another stop, because you're liable to give up stops. So it's tough. I feel like Duran is an off season away from really just being the player that Detroit wants him to be. It's just, can they afford, to wait?
Yeah, I almost tweeted something, and I'm glad I didn't, because I was thinking, I was like, if he does get extended, did they give him the old Marvin Bagley and just say, like, here, like, go for it, give him the 3 for $40, just to like give him something. Like, I don't know if that's like a contract extension that he would take or even want, but I think for like the way he's played, I think that's probably what the organization would probably offer him, like if they did want to offer him an extension.
Yeah, I it's hard to imagine what that number is right now.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't tweet that out, because I know I'd be getting quote tweeted like crazy today. Because I know like Duran does have a pretty big fan base, just like Jaden Ivey, but I don't know. I don't know what it is with him. Like some days he's locked in and focused, other days he's not. I mean, I know the Pistons social team did a thing with him and Malik Beasley, and like someone had mentioned that, like, does Duran have like ADD? I was like, I don't know. Like, he was just like, well, like, get him some Adderall so we can like lock in. I was like, I don't know if it's like that big of a thing where he can't focus, but like with someone with ADD, like, yeah, like I'll be scrolling on my phone. I was like, oh fuck, I gotta get like this like paper done for work in like 5 minutes. It's just like,
yeah,
shit.
Yeah. You looked at me because yeah, I am walking proof, and that's also something that like I do honestly, like, obviously, you only know so much, even in my shoes, but like I have had the same thought. I'm like, I feel like if he had some form of regulating medication, like a Adderall or something, that'd really like unlock where he needs to go. Because as someone with severe ADHD, it gets in the way of like everything. Like, it gets in the way of me doing anything. I will be like, I was supposed to have a handle for this. This was supposed to be sitting right here, but I forgot it at my apartment. So that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. So it's just, yeah, it's a thing.
I mean, like I have it really bad, to the point like when I was doing like topics for this podcast, like I started at like 1 o'clock, and then I look at my phone and it's 6. I was like, fuck, I gotta get off social media. Like, what am I doing? Because I can't focus sometimes. Like, it gets like so bad to the point where I'm just like popping hemp gummies. It's just like the focus. I was just like, bro, like I gotta focus. Like, I can't be on Adderall anymore. I'm 30 years old. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's tough.
Yeah, like I don't know if he does, but I mean, like some of the like the social media posts, like when Ron and I think it was Malik calling him Peanut Head, like at first he's like, what? I said, oh, don't call me Peanut Head. Like, I don't know, man, but we've been on for 2 hours, you guys. I appreciate both of you guys like coming on. The fact that you did, I really do appreciate it. But I do want to give you guys the floor to, plug and promote your social media and also promote your platform that both of you guys work on, RealBullyBall.
Yeah. So as per usual, at Zariq and Zay on Twitter, Instagram. I guess that's it for me. But I do Pistons coverage. Obviously, I do writing and I do photography. I have a couple stories I'm working on that I hope to get out by the end of January. The stuff I like to do with the Pistons coverage and cruise coverage as well is something that I do is a little more in depth, and I like to go more like profiles and stuff like that. So you'll see that at least one of them closer to the end of January. And then my photography, any game I am at, I do photos of, and you'll see on my social media and on our website, www.bullyball.net, under the gallery. And that's where all my work is. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't do all of that. But I am starting to write for RealBullyBall, so check that out. And I tweet a lot, so there's my plug in the screen.
It's all good. I have all of your guys' social media links in the YouTube description below. So all 892 of you guys watching right now, if you guys want to go follow Zariq and Zay on Twitter, definitely do that. Also have RealBullyBall Twitter in the description below, so you guys can just click on it and go support their articles over there and all the work that you guys do. And I know I was watching a Cruise game, and I saw you taking some pictures on the sideline, and someone blew it up, and you're like, bro, I don't look that bad.
Yeah. Dude, I was like, come on, like it's just the broadcast camera. I swear to God, I had like a fit on, dude. Like I genuinely, I
looked at that picture. I was like, wow, I look like genuine, like CCTV, like someone like put a camera out in the wilderness and like I was like walking and they caught me. I had that shit on though. I don't know. That was fucked up, man. I don't know. Tim, if you're watching this, you're going to hell for that, buddy.
I know I saw it. I was like, there's no way Zara looks that bad. It's got to be the camera, because I was just like, usually he has some pretty fire fits, but I saw that, and then like I was scrolling on Pistons Reddit, and someone's like posted it, like what happened to Zariq? I was like, wow.
Yeah, man, that's Tim. We gotta see something about that, man. I
don't know.
That was fucked up.
Side of that picture, and when people, I don't know if you guys remember when like Cade went on vacation, and
yeah.
Someone put like a side by side of that. I'm like, you guys are wild, right?
Man. No, man, because like it's like I'm like hunched over because like I'm taking. People don't realize like when you're taking pictures, the result is like very aesthetically pleasing. But a lot of times the poses you got to do to get the right angle are not visually pleasing. They never make you look cool. So I'm like hunched over, and then it's like 480p camera. I'm like, okay, it's. I'm gonna get like a photo shoot done just because of that, man. Like I gotta get something out there.
Yeah, man. Like when I saw that, I was like, yeah. I don't like that screenshot was like some like Android quality. It was like so bad. I was like, wow, like what are we doing right now? But I appreciate both you guys coming on. We're gonna wrap this podcast. Yeah, for sure, man. I always gotta check on you, see how you're doing, and I just like having you on here like once a month. I always have like a lot of fun just like talking Pistons basketball, and they're actually winning this year, so like the topics aren't as depressing, and it's not like, hey, who should we trade, even though we talked about trades for like 45 minutes. But we're gonna wrap this up, you guys. We're gonna see you guys tomorrow when we do a post-game show with the Rockets and the Pistons immediately after the game. But man, go Pistons. See you guys later. Peace.